is so loud. Time to solve that problem. So the noise is coming from this power supply, and to fix it, we're going to replace the fan with a 92mm Noctua fan. These things are dead quiet. We're going to use this adapter shroud from Printables. Just note that if you're going to use this, it's going to make this thicker, which means you need to increase the height of the feet. So I recommend printing these Bamboo Lab anti-vibration feet. They'll give you enough height so it's not an issue. The last issue is that this thing produces 24 volts DC. This fan runs on 12 volts DC, so we got ourselves a little adapter. These are on Amazon. They're, I don't know, I think it was like 10 bucks. If I had to buy it again though, I think I would have gotten a 120 volt to 12 volt adapter, because that would enable me to power this fan plus additional fans without consuming any of the available power that this power supply puts out. I don't know how much extra power this thing has. I'm assuming it's at least, plus or minus 10-20%. And these fans don't draw hardly shit, so should be fine. To pull this thing apart, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 screws, and then the cover just pops right off. Before you open it up, please unplug power. I'd also wait a few seconds. There's some pretty beefy capacitors inside of this thing. So if you get your hands on them, they could give you a little zap. Capacitors. So just be mindful of that. But if it's been powered down and you flip the on switch with power off, that should drain the capacitors. It's going to attempt to consume all the power, and you should be good to go. The original fan is connected with this little 2-pin header, which is 24 volt hot, which is the red wire, and 24 volt ground, which is the black wire. So we're going to have to cut this wire off. So we're going to strip a little bit off the ends of these because these wires are going to be a little too short to fit all the way over to the location we're going to mount the DC to DC converter. So we need to extend them so we can get power to the converter. So I've just got 2 little pieces of 22 gauge wire here. This is security cable, but I mean, you can use pretty much anything. So I'm just going to strip the ends here. And this is what I'm going to extend the original power supply's length with. I'm going to use solder and some heat shrink. So I've got this little Dewalt compatible soldering iron. This thing's pretty cool. I think it was like 50 bucks on Amazon, but any soldering iron will work. We're going to set this thing to about 650 degrees. Let that thing heat up. And while we're doing that, we'll go ahead and twist our wires together. Now, I would always recommend, if you're doing electronics, verify voltages, verify AC versus DC on your own using a multimeter. But I've already done that on my other Kobra 2, so I know with confidence that this header is 24 volts DC. So I'm just going to trust that Anycubic has not made any changes to how these things are made, and roll with that. Throw a little heat shrink on there. I like this heat shrink because it has hot glue in it. I think it's hot glue, which is going to melt and keep this thing watertight, as well as guarantee that the heat shrink isn't going to slip over time and reveal the conductors. And we're going to take it one step further with an additional piece of heat shrink, just to keep these joints nice and stiff and steady. And I'm just looking at the corners, and you may not be able to see it in the camera, but I'm waiting for the glue to start to ooze out a little bit, and it is. So now it's time to mount the Noctua fan. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to use this chaseway that's built into the fan to have these wires come out of the power supply. So I'm just going to route them through. You could also drill a hole in the model. You can edit that model to give yourself a hole for the wires. We did this on the other Anycubic and it worked just fine, so I'll just stick with that. And you do need a decent amount of wire from the fan to the header. I think it's probably about give or take 8 inches there, so that's what I'm going to run with. I think that'll be fine. And you want the I don't know what you call this, the cradle of the fan, facing the bottom of the unit. So as you mount it onto here, that's the configuration that you want. So you want the wires for the fan and your header to come out, and then we're going to use the screws included with the fan to just go ahead and mount it to the adapter plate. Just putting downward pressure on the screw and downward pressure on the adapter so that the fan is snug against the adapter as I'm screwing it in. And these screws are going to bite into the plastic and eventually they will tighten. And just as a little trick, if you feel the screw kind of push the fan forward, just back it out all the way and then drive it in again. And eventually those threads will catch and the fan will be flush. That part's not really that critical. Again, we're just trying to achieve good airflow through that power supply. So this adapter plate is only going to mount with 4 screws, not 6 like the original. Again, I don't think there's anything critical about that, but it's just going to be on the sides here and the sides here. And I'm just going to use some off-the-shelf 1/2-inch screws that I have laying around for that. If you look around in the power supply, but I'm going to double check and make sure that the screw is not going to come in contact with the capacitor and not even come close because vibrations. And in the event that, you know, it does, I'll just omit that screw and I think it'll be fine. You can see here that that screw is coming a little close to that capacitor. It's not touching, but rather than omit the screw, I think I'm just going to shave that down a hair. You could also get shorter screws, or you could just omit it like I mentioned. These are the focus. These are the screws that I'm using. Again, I think these are 1/2-inch. They might be a hair shorter than that, but they'll work just fine. Here's the screw now with the old snip snip. I just used a pair of lineman pliers, and you can see I have about 1/4 of an inch, if not more. When I go to put this screw in, I'm going to actually first use a full-length screw. I verified that it isn't going to come in contact with the capacitor, and that will cut the threads into the plastic. And then I'll back that full-length screw out, and I'll put this cut down, shortened screw in, just for peace of mind. Okay, before we move on though, we need to go ahead and wire up the DC to DC converter. So the leads from our header are going to go to the 24 in. Red will go in plus, black will go in minus, and then we're going to chop this. And actually, we'll cut all these wires to length. I'm going to give them about 3 inches or so. It should be plenty of space to give me options for where I want to put the converter. And with the Noctua fans, there's 4 conductors in here. There's yellow, black, green, and blue. We're going to go ahead and just slice these things right in the middle and then peel the wires apart. Now, these green and blue wires are not going to be used. These are for pulse width modulation control, which is something if you're using these in a computer, the computer might do. So we're just going to snip those off. And the yellow wire is your plus and the black wire is your minus for these fans. So let's get these things wired up. But before I do that, I don't like leaving bare conductors. I intentionally cut these one longer than the other. So I'm just going to put a little piece of heat shrink right over top of that, seal them in, and they won't ever cause a problem. Not that I think they would to begin with. So let's grab a little piece of heat shrink. Cut that thing down just a little bit. I'll just slide it over all the wires here. And I'll slide those green and blue wires in. And then we'll give her the old heat treatment. All right, good enough. So let's strip these things out. And these are some itty bitty wires on the fan, so just be careful. I'm using diagonal cutters, flush cut, detail cutters, which are actually great for trimming up prints too. But I'm putting very light pressure on the jacket, and I'm relying on the blades of the cutters to pull the jacket. If you put too much pressure, you're definitely going to cut some of the wires, which depending on how much of a pigtail you left yourself, could get you into trouble and needing to solder more later if you take too much off. So we're just going to give these a twist. Some people might say you should put connectors on these cables or wires. I don't agree, not for something of this size. I mean, these fan wires are probably 28, 30 gauge. And I believe a crimp is just more likely to sever the wire than it is to protect it or help it. And this little adapter has set screws with mounting plate, or I don't know what you call them, but little flat plates under the screw. So it's really just a plate clamping on a plate on top of the wire, which is all a connector is going to do, a crimp connector. Therefore, what is the point, right? So set these down. Again, yellow on positive, and this is on the 12 volt side. I don't know if you can see there or not, but it says 12 volts, plus minus. And then the red and black from the header on the 24 volt inside, red to plus, black to minus. All right, so our converter's wired up, and I'm gonna take another step here because I know how I'm gonna mount this. I'm gonna use what's called VHB tape, which if you've never heard of this stuff, it stands for very high bond. This particular tape is, I think, suited for automotive use, so they would use this to put body panels on cars. So that should be plenty strong enough to adhere a little adapter to the bottom of my printer. If it ever does come loose, I'll probably just, I don't know, either reapply it or use a screw fastener, something like that. But I think this will be fine to hold it down. All right, so now that we have our assembly together, I'm gonna go ahead and plug in the fan header. I'm gonna dry fit everything. So we'll route this wire down this way. And we'll go ahead and make sure that everything fits up. And a little trick to this adapter is to slide the back in first, this side, and then the front forward. And that should be good. And we'll go ahead and move that out of the way for a second and turn it on. Just make sure she spins. You should feel air blowing out in the fan. That's the orientation that the original fan was in. And you should be able to hopefully not hear much at all, but hear the difference. So now the fan is on, it's spinning, dead nuts quiet. And so I don't know what type of fasteners was intended to be used by this 3D model, this adapter plate, but these screws work just fine. Again, they're just biting into the plastic holes, and the holes are the right diameter for this type of screw. But this last hole doesn't go all the way through, so I'm gonna have to give her a little pressure to get her to drill through. And the last step is to use the very high bond tape. So we'll go ahead and just peel back off of that. There we go. And just a little tip with this stuff, it does like a little bit of heat. So if you have your heat gun handy, just heat it up until you start to see just a little bit of bubbling. It doesn't take much. We'll move the wires up and out of the way, and we'll call the job done.